Okay, so today I am delighted to be joined by Ryan Craft, Head of Insight and Analytics at Reckitt. He steers decisions behind some of the world's most recognisable brands. I'm delighted to have you as a guest, Ryan. I really admire your calm authority and sharp eye for the big picture. And I have been really, really, really looking forward to this. The first time I ever saw you speak, you just really struck me. You spoke about being a lighthouse. And I know people won't listen, might think, oh, a lighthouse. It was so brilliant. It was really exhilarating and enlivening to think about performing at your peak when the pressure is the highest. It was really smart, really grounded, and really inspiring. And I think, when you don't know you need to hear something, but at that moment in time, it really refocused me, really re-energized me, sort of just when I needed it. So I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here. I think this is going to be a brilliant conversation. So listeners are in for a real treat. Ryan, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. And also, thanks for such an amazing introduction. I think you've actually raised examples there, which I've totally forgotten about, which is, I'm like, oh yeah, we actually did that.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, thanks for having me.
Brilliant. Well, hey, it is brilliant to have you here today. I'm excited to. I think we're going to kind of cover a lot of ground. I'm very excited to hear your perspective. My first question, Ryan, is champion consumers in businesses. That is absolutely what you do with, as I said, some of the most recognisable brands. Why do you bother doing it?
Why do we all bother doing it is probably, yeah. I think it's a really tough question, and when I was thinking about how you even begin to answer something like this, I always go back to you need to do what makes you happy. Now, when I say what makes you happy is you need to do what makes you happy most of the time. I think in all of our roles or any job that you end up doing is you're not going to be happy all the time, but try and find something that you can actually try and keep yourself happy most of the time, and then do that and try and do it as much as you possibly can. I think when you think about why bother, I mean, the way I do it is probably twofold. The first most important thing to me is always, why do we earn a living? I do this because my family. That is the number one priority. I know a lot of people leapfrog to, oh, it's because of career X, Y, and Z and learning. But the reality is we do this so we can actually spend time with the people that we really love. Now, that aside, how do I even end up in this type of work? Why bother when it comes to insights analytics? I think to me, what I had noted down on the specific question was two things. So keep in mind what makes me happy and doing what I want comes in two parts. So the first thing is what makes me happy over the longer term. So what fuels me to get up in the morning and come to work? I think about it in, am I solving problems and how do I solve problems? There's something inside me that gets really excited when there's something that people cannot solve or cannot fix. And I've got the opportunity to try and come in and solve for that piece. And that might be a tiny research or consumer facing question, or it might be something more broad or big based when it comes down to what does it mean from a business perspective. So how I solve problems is probably the key fuel that gets me up in the morning. And then another thing is solving problems. Anyone can do more. It's easy to do more, ask for more data, do more research, etc. But the other thing that fuels me is the idea of simplicity. How do we do less? How do we do fewer things? And also, when you communicate, how do you do it in a way that is in as few words as possible, that people just get it? And that, when you start to bring those things together, the idea of problem solving, but doing it in the simplest way, is what really matters to me. And where I really I get this excitement, that, hey, I'm onto something here. I cannot wait to be able to share it. That is really what gets me up in the morning.
Yeah, amazing. I think that whole sort of simplicity through complexity is an interesting balance for insight people, isn't it? And that whole how do we do less? I think that is such a bold move. Our founder Alison talks a lot about that. She says, "Oh, the temptation to break the data one more way, kind of keep looking, not make a decision. Like you have got to resist that at some point because it is getting in your way."
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think so many times we get lost in, by going one step deeper, you lose sight of the bigger picture. I mean, you mentioned it in how we try to think about it at key phases in our operating model as well. Sometimes we lose sight of, even from an insight analytics point of view, going that step further. How do I slice it by this and this question? But I think what we need to do is actually stop looking at it one step further and start looking at it two steps higher. Not only also through the lens of an insights and analytics view, but how do I think about it and put myself in the shoes of my business partners, one plus business partners? How would they think about it and solve for it? And what you start to see is how everyone would solve through that would be different, and the importance and how they would look at that piece of information gets very different. Also, the higher you take it, which that's coming back. That's where I really love the passion, and I think we often lose sight of needing to go deeper versus actually we need to go higher.
On my next question for you is a question I love because I think it's really nice to hear about different relationships and how people have kind of got to where they are. So my next question for you, Ryan, is, you've had well, say had an incredible career, like you're at the end of it. It's still an incredible career. Who do you owe?
So, I mean, who do you owe? It's like, how do you even begin to answer a question like this or put it down to an individual person, an individual occasion? When I think about a question like this, I think the first person that you need to owe is yourself, because you are the person that actually makes it happen at the end of the day. You can get given multiple opportunities, learning opportunities, career opportunities. At the end of the day, you might attribute that to person 1, 2, 3, but the person that we often overlook is yourself. You're the one that actually has to go ahead and do it. Stand up and do the thinking, do those presentations, put your name forward, and build your own equity. So I think my immediate answer to who do you owe? I owe it to myself. But I think that's just one element. But in terms of the who I actually owe, I probably reflect right down in the early phases of my career. I was influenced by someone who I even still think of today and hope that I get the opportunity to cross paths with them in the way our careers have gone. But this person in my life was on the professional side, and when I was breaking into my career, didn't necessarily give me like tools or tricks or anything to do with how to do, be it research or strategic thinking, etc. What he did is he just gave me a way of thinking that I could then apply to multiple different areas. Now, when I take that way of thinking and I layer it with the passion I've got for problem solving, the passion I've got for creativity and simplicity, we started to get almost, that's where my career really started to almost be shaped into, I wouldn't say where it is today, but the style that I have today.
Sounds amazing. It sounds almost like a sort of both a kind of kindred spirit and an absolute kind of aspiration all wrapped together. I want to move on, Ryan, and ask you about some things that maybe are, you're sort of still playing with at the moment. You're maybe in a bit of a kind of slight kind of messy middle. It's not kind of totally resolved. You're still kind of thinking about or experimenting with, and see what comes to mind when I ask you about that.
A messy middle. I think exactly as you say it. There's everything that is pristine and sharp on the edges, but the lion's share of everything and what we do day to day, it's chaos, right? It's chaos, and this is probably why I love simplification so much, because you're trying to make sense of all the chaos. So it's a really, really tough one to answer in terms of how do you even begin to approach the messy middle. So maybe I'll frame it more along the lines of, be it my frustration points that we're trying to figure out and solve. And this is something which, as an insights analytics partner, we'll always have to try and solve for. But the fact that everyone thinks that they are the consumer is probably one of the biggest messy middles that we're trying to solve for, because you're in meetings making choices where you always need to anchor in the consumer. And it's so easy to get lost in your perspective of what that consumer is, which is why it's so important to always have and be that voice of the consumer in everything that we do. And this balance between moving at pace, introducing what is the role for the consumer, what is the consumer's voice, and then what is the need for the business, is always going to be very blurry and messy middle. But what I've found is the moment that you stay as close as possible to your consumer and what their needs are, etc., you will always find that the appetite for change and the speed for growth is always much faster. So this idea that we are not our consumer, but we sometimes like to think we are, is probably one of the biggest messy middles. I want to caveat with that with the other side of the coin. That's one side of the coin, is everyone thinking they're the consumer. The other side is relying too much on our consumer. A lot of the time we put so much on how we think the consumer thinks about our categories. We overthink the consumer far too much. And for example, even I think about like Reckitt type of categories that we play in, surface care, dish care, etc. I mean, a lot of the time when we speak about empathy with the consumer and consumer cares, so on and so forth, I mean, how often do you, let's say, open your fridge or open the cleaning cupboard and be like, oh, I really care about brand X today. I cannot wait to grab that and shine my surfaces. It's almost a bit of a fake environment we've created, but the idea that we overthink how much consumers actually care about products like this. There for sure are brands where they play a much more important role in the lives of consumers, but when it comes to categories and FMCG categories, there are a matter of seconds where consumers are not really thinking about maybe the brand, but more the role or benefit that they're after. And the quicker we can learn that consumer doesn't think too much about us, the more that we'll be able to actually make probably better decisions, faster decision making, but also be smarter with how we think about our strategy.
Amazing. I was nodding along so much through that because I think me and so many people are listening have been in those shoes that you talked about, whereby you're trying to talk consumer and someone wants to talk about their personal experience last Saturday or what their teenager thinks or that kind of thing. And I think that is a real challenge for people in insight and trying to influence consumer within the business.
Just a quick one on that as well. Like, I would love it. I do love the fact that people come with those ideas because, again, it brings the perspective, brings that challenging nature that we spoke about. I think it's finding the right balance between how much should I use that to influence decision, or is it part of the discussion that we should be having? And there are moments where we find that right balance and the perfect balance. And it can also act as like a great springboard to, that's an area we haven't actually thought about before, because at the end of the day, we also forget that we are the consumer to a degree. And we get lost in the fact that sometimes our point of view in that can actually count. It's about finding the right balance for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And that balance, I think, is tough to find because, you're right. In many ways, we are the consumer. In lots of other senses, we see huge disconnects between the lives of people making these sorts of decisions and the lives of the consumers actually using this kind of product or service. And so it is a bit of a dance, isn't it? Understanding that, because they can be worlds apart, I think. Sometimes we've done a lot of work into that, illuminating that kind of empathy gap. And it is astounding at points. And so it is a real art, I think, to find that balance and know when to challenge, when to use it to influence.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I guess I think when you take a step back and you look at all of the possible consumer work that you can do, the insights that you can find. I go back to this point around the ability to take that and putting into something that's meaningful. And when I say meaningful, I'm talking about what are the commercial actions that we can take on back of this. And that's where you get this really interesting territory from, let's say, an insight analytics professional point of view, is where you stop becoming an insights analytics person, CMI person, and you start becoming more of a strategy partner. And you can do as much consumer research as possible and be the expert in that forum. But if you're not able to translate that into something that the business can actually use tangibly, everything that you have done ends up falling a little bit short, or it doesn't actually have the impact that it possibly could have had if you were able to find the right way to communicate it. So I think there's probably a massive opportunity for us to not only think about us doing consumer research, but us getting better at being strong communicators, storytellers. Storytellers in a way that we don't just tell the consumer story, but we link it with what the business story could be as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely. I think that we hear so much about storytelling, don't we? And I think it is one of those almost kind of forever goals, isn't it, to be better at storytelling? And it's such a kind of focus of the industry. I think it's an always underestimated, challenging thing to do, to blend both of those things, because of course when you do it, it feels so instinctive, doesn't it? There's something about it that feels so harmonious and so right, that I don't think you do reflect on all the sweat that went into it. You're just like, oh yeah, aha. And I think so if you are getting that kind of reaction from people and they are just kind of moving on and using it as fuel for decision making, I think that's when you know you've really kind of nailed it.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, just with you saying that and also reflecting on the discussion around the messy middle, is like everyone that you speak to now is just so time starved. No one has the time for this. No one has the time to sit with the consumer. And I guess the question to the likes of ourselves on the insight side is, how do you not wait for that final communication? So it's easier to communicate something if someone's been part of the journey. How do we solve for this very time-starved, a million things on my plate? Is there a smarter way to bring consumer into the discussion always versus moments of time? And how do you maybe not just leave down to a moment of communication and decision making and choices, but the people that we work with on a day-to-day basis, how are we consistently anchoring them in what their consumer is actually doing and where their consumer is at? Because that will help solve for the things that we're talking about in terms of you're not your consumer, the idea that we overthink how much consumers actually care, and so on and so forth. So an interesting challenge. I don't know the answer yet. There are multiple different ways you can try it, but yeah, as we think about time starved, everyone being time starved, how do we still maintain consumer centricity?
Yeah, such a challenge. And I think that kind of aspiration of it, we keep coming back to quite kind of deep sensations. You use the word anchor, I think, instinct. You know, they're inbuilt, aren't they? This isn't about kind of moments. This is about, it's someone who I was talking to. I think it was Joe from Thomas to Cook talked about it as like brushing your teeth. That kind of sensation. And I think it is something that is challenging a lot of people in the industry. I've not met anyone who says I've absolutely nailed it. It's definitely a difficult thing and something to wrestle with. So my final question, Ryan, is to just look sort of slightly kind of further out and your perspective on how do you win? How can people kind of keep winning? What are the kind of personal qualities or mantra or kind of thought that we need as insight professionals moving to the future?
I think just being in insights analytics as a foundation, I think if you want to win, you have to stay as close as possible to your consumer. This is as close as possible to your consumer doesn't mean having to speak to them every single day or whatever, but being in touch with the choices that they make the reality of how your portfolio plays a part of those choices. So it's probably the first thing. I think the consumer is the ultimate decision maker of how your category or company is going to deliver growth. So it only makes sense to stay as close as possible to them. The next is probably what I've spoken about from a people point of view, surrounding yourself with people that are actually going to radically push you and how you think. Because if you're thinking stronger and they're thinking stronger, soon enough, the whole company is thinking stronger. So being smart around, you don't always get the opportunity to choose who you're working with, but choosing the teams that you want to be part of. And that may be the teams you always work with, but maybe also individual people that you identify have a lot of talent and you want to be able to learn from them. So surrounding yourself with the right team and the people is a massive enabler, I believe. The last thing is probably just the actual desire to win. You can be as passionate as you want, but if you don't have that drive to action nature of, right, we've got the consumer inside, we've got the right people, let's get out there and make it happen. Let's be a little bit competitive. I think that's where things start to get exciting, and that may not be exhaustive, but I feel that those three things is what I would lean on to be able to win.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ryan. I think really interesting, that last reflection. I love your perspective. I think one of the things when I hear you speak, particularly about how you perform and around kind of peak performances, what I hear is a really exciting take on balance. Everybody talks so much about balance, and I think we're sort of slightly obsessed with this idea of balancing your life maybe within a sort of 24-hour period or within a week, or that sort of thing. But you talk really kind of passionately about actually like actively find moments where you are tipping completely the other way. Put yourself in a team where someone is way better than you, stretch, keep being curious, and then kind of move towards the total other end. It's not about this kind of balance. It's about take 2 steps back and find some balance, I guess. Thank you so much, Ryan. I knew this speaking today would be brilliant. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thanks so much for joining me.
No, thank you so much for having me. I've actually really enjoyed it too. Made me think about a lot today as well.
Hey, that's good. That's really good.
Exactly. But thank you very much, Laura.
Thank you.